All right, Tommy, this is experiment number 4. And where we left things off last time was I mentioned this phrase, the tragedy of best intentions that I see as a problem in a lot of companies that are trying to scale. And it comes with the natural desire to scale. You got to divide and conquer a little bit. And that everyone knows that creates silos. But what happens is things get worse because people are trying to be really good at their jobs. It's like you get promoted by being really good at your jobs, and then you get to a certain level, and actually that becomes a bit of a problem. And so, HR is going to conferences and thinking about how are we really good at HR? What are best practices we can put in place? What are rules that we can put in the system? And what happens is you end up getting more rules into a company as opposed to more accountability and responsibility put on managers. Or I've seen it in particular silos where DevOps sort of loses track of the product development team being the real customers, and they get a little too focused on things that they're interested in, which is natural. People want to be good at their jobs. They want to pursue things that are interesting to them. And it also, to be frank, it also makes them more attractive on the job market. But sometimes that can come in secondary to, being really practical about what is needed in the organization. This even happens on product development teams when the PM's really focused on being a good PM, the designer's really focused on being a good designer or working on, I want to work on cutting edge stuff. And, I think there's very few companies that manage to overcome it. And I think as you get more senior, I think this problem is real and does need to be solved. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a real problem. Is this the
All
end of the
right,
conversation? All right, cool. It was fun. See you again next week.
Yeah.
No, I genuinely agree. I mean, I've railed against the kind of unalignment and siloification issue a lot in my writing and in some of our conversations. It's truly the thing that tears these adolescent companies apart is, I think this best intentions thing is truly a part of it, and like a desire for functional excellence is a part of it.
Yeah.
But like all problems, it always starts from the top. If the problem doesn't start at the top, the solution at least has to start at the top, which means that every leader of the organization needs to be keenly aware that this is one of the key things that would wedge this company to pieces, and do everything that they can to steer in the other direction. The only problem is, especially in like scale-up companies, leadership teams often are collections of functional leaders who are in those seats because they got real freaking good at engineering or marketing or sales or HR or product. But that's the only slice that they master. And they haven't had time to mature yet to be executives, which means mastering with a lowercase m all the parts of the business to start understanding how, as a leader, could I like steer against the skid to bring these organizations together. And then, of course, you have CEOs who don't necessarily realize that what happened organically early on, which is this like alignment through osmosis when you're 10 people, like alignment just happens, that it's actually a huge part of their job to galvanize these 100, 200, 500 people. And they oftentimes hire experienced individuals to run the organizations. And then they start like squeezing the screws on functional excellence. And oftentimes actually asking the functional leaders to bring forth, like, how can I tell your organization is worth the investment?
Right.
When in fact, most experienced people will know, like, the true multipliers happen in the margins between the departments and how well they work together and like lift each other up. And at the heart of it is, like you said, individual people's instincts and motivations, which oftentimes, like, you identify by who you are. I'm an engineer. I'm an HR business partner. I'm a, demand gen specialist. And you want to be really good at that. You go to your conferences, you read your crafts, blog posts, and whatever. And then you come to the broader team laced with that functional excellence awareness. And then you're faced with usually functionally minded promotion and rewards and measurement criteria.
Yep.
One of the things that always stuck with me, I think John Cutler used it in a podcast interview with Melissa Perry, which is one of, I think, Melissa's best episodes. Was he was talking about promotion-driven development, which is, I'm sure we've both seen, like, especially in engineering, what usually ends up happening in the day-to-day aligns pretty well with how the organization looks at engineering excellence. If you want lines of code, you're going to get lines of code. If you want modules refactored, you're going to get modules refactored. Like, what drives promotions and acknowledgement and compensation drives the behavior. And I think the best intentions coupled with incentivization is like a force that's hard to fight against.
The incentive side is so difficult because we have, in organizations, we have this impulse to, or let me say this is a presumption I have. We have this impulse to try to make things fair, which is good, right? We want a meritocracy, and we want to remove bias from the system. But what happens is people start trying to make things metrics driven. Matter of fact, it's like, numbers are really important, but our profession, actually the business world in general, puts numbers, metrics on a pedestal too much. And I say this knowing that I teach a finance class and telling people how they need to understand finance better. But, there's so much more to our work than that. And so, like, I don't like promoting people based on outcomes or numerical outputs. The numerical outputs leads to incentive, just really bad side effects, like lines of code, right? Is a perfect example of that. And that could happen in marketing, it could happen in product management, and anything. I also don't like promoting people just because their team had a win or because they had an effective outcome, because there's a lot to that that's outside of their control. I think we've talked about this before, that if you do that too much, then people just go for safe things. I think there is room for judgment. And this is actually, like, what drives me crazy about HR systems at most companies, is because it's sort of I keep on forgetting how to pronounce this word, infantilizing people, right? It just treats everyone like children. And HR does this because managers act like children. They promote people because they want to be loved, right? They want to be friendly. They, like, they want their people to feel appreciated. And so they're careless with promotions and money. They throw titles around too much. They do it too easily. They do it at the wrong time so that finance can't budget effectively. They do irresponsible things, and then HR says, okay, we're going to lock this down. You can only do promotions once or twice a year. Everything else is frozen, right? And it's an asinine way to treat your stars in an organization. But so there's this lockdown effect that happens because we don't hold people accountable to just using really good judgment as to what you do. So back to the promotions thing, I like seeing, are they doing their job in a really excellent way? Right? All of us have hard jobs in all the professions. Everything we do is hard, right? But, so there's going to be wins, there's going to be failures, but if you look at someone and you go, I really respect how they approach this. Even though they failed, they did this in a really smart way, or they won and they did this in a really excellent way, and they work well with their team and all this kind of stuff. And that deserves promotion. But there's judgment involved there. And everyone gets scared of that, like, oh, there's bias and judgment and this soft, fuzzy thing. And it's like, God damn it. When we try to remove that from our managers, when we don't demand that of our managers, then we all act like children. We get treated with these stupid bureaucratic rules. Anyway, I could go on and on about this, but this is like, it's so many companies walk down this path and they cannot divert from it. And it's terrible.
I think what scares people a lot is that as much as we want to look at all these things as a science, there's always an element of art. Yeah. And there's always an element of qualitative, and there's always an element of judgment. Because and it's also like what's your level of zoom? You know what I mean? Like, are you judging, like, how granular do you want to get? Are you judging the overall team's performance? Are you judging an individual team's performance? Are you judging an individual in a team's performance? because if you zoom too close, you end up potentially missing a lot of the silent multipliers in the margins. Like I've always had this quip of like, the only 10x engineers I've ever met are the ones that 2x 5 people around them.
Yeah.
But that's not measurable. You just simply can't measure how an individual engineer makes everybody, including the designer and the PM around them, better. Because even that better can be a little qualitative.
Yeah. But
But
we can all see it.
yeah,
You go to
but
anyone in the organization and say, call out, 3 people who do what you just said, and they
yep.
can name them. We see it.
Which is why I don't know why all conversations seem to always like veer towards accountability, but um, as qualitative as it may be, I've always taken peer feedback as like the most valuable signal of any sort of like assessment on how somebody's doing their job, because that's the other part. It's like nobody sees a 360 of any individual, including the manager. Nobody has a full 360 view of how somebody's working, especially somebody like a product person who's working with potentially a dozen or more people on a daily or weekly basis. Nobody has a full 360 view on how they're doing.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to be ravenous about collecting feedback. Same thing with engineers. Like no analysis of like GitHub or Jira or whatever the heck is going to reveal exactly the excellence of an engineer.
Yep.
Because again, the best and brightest that I've worked with are the ones that'll immediately drop their own task to help somebody over the finish line. And there's now this like whole generation of eng productivity tools that measure like the sentiment of conversations in code review comments. And like I applaud the approach that, okay, we're going beyond like deploys and Dora metrics and whatever. But at the same time, it's like we're still so gung-ho on quantifying something that is a little black magic mumbo jumbo.
I kind of agree with what I think I heard you say, that the solution for this really does have to come from the top. To break down these silos, to get your people focused on the team rather than the function, and to get effective management, promotions, accountability, incentive structures. It's like the CEO has to demand it from their 8 reports, and to say, and they have to demand it from their 8 reports, and they have to demand it from their 8 reports, and so on and so forth down the line. And I don't think it happens enough. I think that people kind of coast through as a manager, and not actually demanding accountability on this particular issue of leaning into teams and being sensible about promotions and things like that. And I just believe that if you actually ripple it all the way down, if a manager knows that if they are not being responsible for how they're providing feedback to their people, how they're handling incentives, how they're handling promotions, if they know that they're going to be held to task for that, they will step up and do a better job. Now, some will fail, but some people are successful, some people aren't. It's because it doesn't ladder from the top that, again, we put all these rules in place, but they don't really solve the problem. They put a Band-Aid on the problem, so it's a little bit better, but it doesn't really solve it, and it creates new problems.
Yeah, and it's again like by solving a problem, you're creating new ones. So I truly believe, again, starting from your first premise of like it all happens with the best of intentions, right?
Yep.
This whole like tightening the screws on functional excellence really starts from this place of we need to like isolate and identify underperformers, underperforming orgs, underperforming leaders, and underperforming individuals in our organization so we can replace them and improve our organization, which is fine. Like that is a very just fundamental. But if in doing so, you create an environment that eliminates cross-departmental collaboration, like enables and empowers local maximum seeking rather than how do we win as a whole company, Who cares? At the same time, if you have an organization with a whole bunch of freeloaders, but the team is winning, that's okay, right? And that's not me making a statement of like, yeah, it's super cool to keep kind of mediocre performers, because that's a whole nother topic, that mediocre performers create a culture of mediocrity.
Yeah.
But my point is, I would much rather have a team where not every individual and every team is an absolute killer, but that still comes together and wins,
Yep.
than a team where every single individual component is an absolute tier A like monster, but it just doesn't lock in together and as such falls apart.
I really try to remind myself to not look at this from a negative judgmental place, but from a positive place, which is why I use that phrase, the tragedy of best intentions. Like, I think when I was younger, I would get frustrated with parts of the organization and negative about things, and reminding myself as a leader that, look, people are doing their best. Oftentimes when it's not working, it's not because they're bad, it's because the fit's not there or the incentives are misaligned or things like that. But start from a place of positivity, that people are trying to do their best. But it doesn't mean the system's not broken. And it does really take, it's like if you are senior now, if you're at that top inner circle of the organization, you need to talk about this. You need to work through it. You need to push yourself to try to break this cycle with accountability and positivity.
Well, that sounds like a really good place for us to cap, because I think we've gone through a lot of time again, as always.
Well, thanks for letting me rant.
No,
I
this was a good
appreciate
one.
it.
Maybe
All
I'll,
right, what
I'll
are we
maybe
covering
I'll
next week? Do you have an idea?
gee, I wish I did. I've got a couple bubbling, and maybe I'll actually even flip the script around, and maybe I'll actually use this conversation to inspire my next week's article. Who knows? So maybe
Who
we'll come
knows?
back to this, or maybe we'll handle the enterprise stuff that I wrote about this week. I don't know. We're both just freebirding through life here, aren't we?
There we go. Sounds good to me. All right, thanks, Tommy.
Thank
Until
you.
next time.